There is a courthouse in St. Louis, Missouri, where a case was filed in 1891 that nobody taught you about in school. The ruling survives in the probate archives of St. Louis City. When you read the full transcript, not the summary, but the full transcript, you find something that changes the shape of every other question you thought you'd already answered. The case involved a woman named Vera Corbin. She was born in 1853. She died in 1889. At the time of her death, she held a deed to property in a district that the official city maps of St. Louis had listed as uninhabited marshland since at least 1867. Her family sued to claim the estate. The city contested it on the grounds that the property had never legally existed. They lost. I came to this through the wrong door entirely. I was not researching Vera Corbin. I was trying to understand why so many American cities built between 1840 and 1880 show a consistent pattern of what urban historians gently call infrastructure discontinuity. The sewage systems, the gas lines, the underground drainage networks that were supposedly constructed during this period don't match the construction records of the period. The materials are wrong. The joinery techniques predate the official installation dates by decades. In some cases, the systems run beneath streets that weren't platted until years after the pipes were supposedly laid. You find this in Philadelphia, in Cincinnati, in Chicago before and after the fire, in St. Louis most of all. St. Louis in the 1840s was a city being built on top of something. That's when I found Vera Corbin. Her birth certificate is the first piece of evidence that doesn't fit the established record. It was filed in June of 1853 at the St. Louis County Recorder's Office. The address listed for her family home is on a street that appears on 0 official city maps from that year. The street name itself, a French designation meaning roughly the lower settlement road, does not appear in any surveyor's record from the 1850s. But it appears in Vera Corbin's birth record. It appears in the property deed her father, Elias Corbin, registered in 1857. And it appears in the testimony given by 3 separate witnesses during the 1891 probate hearing, all of whom described in court under oath the specific physical characteristics of a neighborhood they had personally visited. The witnesses described buildings, stone buildings, cut stone with arched doorways and vaulted ceilings at dimensions that one witness, a former city surveyor named Hollander, described as consistent with what he called Old World civic construction. He used that phrase, Old World civic construction, in a probate court in St. Louis in 1891. The city's lawyers tried to have the testimony stricken. The judge allowed it to stand. He ruled that the question of whether the neighborhood had existed was a matter of fact, not a matter of what the city's maps showed. To understand what the witnesses described, you need to understand what was happening beneath St. Louis in the 1840s, because the city itself had already stumbled into the answer and filed it away without realizing what it had found. The official history of St. Louis's infrastructure begins with a crisis. In 1849, a cholera epidemic killed roughly 1 in every 11 residents. The city had no sewer system. The first city engineer, a man named Henry Kaiser, had been diverting wastewater since 1842 by routing it into what period documents describe as a honeycomb of limestone caves beneath the city. That phrase comes from the city's own records. A honeycomb of limestone caves beneath the streets, already there when the city needed them. When cholera killed nearly 6,000 people that summer, the city finally committed to building a real sewer system. In preparation for that expansion, a civil engineer named Barton Wade was commissioned in 1847 to survey what was actually underground in the lower settlement district near the riverfront. His report, which survives in the Missouri Historical Society archives, describes what he found beneath 3 city blocks in the area, then known as the old Laclede district. He found a network of stone-lined passages. The walls were finished and mortared. The arches above them were cut with a precision that Kaiser's limestone caves did not have. Ventilation shafts rose at regular intervals. The walls showed no evidence of recent construction. Wade estimated the stonework was at minimum 50 years old. He noted that the passages connected to what appeared to be the foundations of surface structures for which he could find no current corresponding buildings above ground. He recommended the city investigate further before proceeding with the sewer project. The city filed his report and proceeded with the sewer project anyway. The passages were incorporated into the new drainage system. The recommendation was never followed up. Wade's report sat in the archives for 40 years, read by almost nobody, until a lawyer named Edmund Verrill pulled it out in 1891 during the preparation of Vera Corbin's estate case. It was Verrill who connected the address on her birth certificate to Wade's survey coordinates. The lower settlement road that appeared in her family's property from records sat directly above the passage network that Wade had documented in 1847, above foundations Wade had noted but could not explain. Verrill argued, and the court eventually agreed, that Vera Corbin had been born in a district that predated the city's own records, that her family had held property in a portion of street, Louis, that the city had never officially platted because it had not needed to be built. It had already been there. The three witnesses who testified in 1891 were not fringe figures. Hollander, the former city's surveyor, had worked for the municipal government for 16 years. The second witness, a woman named Cecile Moreau, who had been a neighbour of the Corbin family, was in her late 60s at the time of the hearing. She had lived in the district as a child and young adult. The third was a retired freight broker named Dunbar, who had conducted business in the area throughout the 1860s. All three described the same physical environment without coordinating their accounts. Stone buildings 2 and 3 stories with ground floor commercial spaces and residential floors above. Internal staircases with risers higher than standard, a detail Hollander noted specifically because he had measured them during a property assessment in 1863. Doorways arched rather than rectangular. Interior ceilings vaulted, not flat. Floors of laid stone, not wood planking. Windows with thick stone frames and recessed glass. Cecile Moreau described the light inside the buildings as different. She said the windows were set so deep into the walls that the light changed quality by the time it reached the interior. She remembered this as a child. She said it was unlike any other building she had been in before or since. Dunbar described the street level differently from the adjacent city blocks. He said the streets in the lower settlement district sat below the grade of the surrounding city, perhaps 3 or 4 feet. Walking from the platted city streets into the district involved a noticeable descent. He said he had never thought much about it. It was simply how the neighbourhood was. The judge read all of this into the record. Then he asked Hollander directly why, if this district had existed and had been assessed by a municipal surveyor, it did not appear on any city map. Hollander's answer is the one I keep returning to. He said, "I cannot tell you why it was not mapped. I can tell you it was there." The pattern I have been tracing across 4 cities is not subtle once you know what to look for. In Cincinnati, an 1852 excavation for a commercial building foundation broke through into a stone-walled chamber of unclear origin. The contractor reported it to the city. An inspector's report in the Hamilton County Archive describes the chamber as pre-existing construction of unknown date, with mortared stonework inconsistent with local building practices. The chamber was filled and the foundation was poured on top of it. That report has never been cited in any published history of Cincinnati. In Philadelphia, an 1861 drainage survey documented 17 locations where existing underground stonework of unknown origin was incorporated into the expansion. The survey engineer noted that the incorporated structures showed no evidence of having been built for drainage purposes. They had been repurposed. From what prior use, he did not speculate. In Chicago, the famous raising of the city's grade level in the 1850s and 1860s is taught as construction over swampy ground. The project was real and well documented. What almost no account mentions is what the pre-project surveys found at existing grade. Stone foundations that the city's own records did not account for. The engineers documented them, worked around them, and moved on. The question of what the foundations belonged to was never formally asked. Each of these findings, taken alone, is an anomaly. Together they describe something else. Vera Corbin died in 1889. She was 36 years old. She had lived her entire life in St. Louis. At the time of her death, she held the deed to property on the lower settlement road that her father Elias had registered in 1857. She had a younger brother. She had not married. The property deed was her primary asset. When the estate went to probate, her brother Hector filed to inherit the deed. The city of St. Louis, through its municipal property office, contested the claim on the grounds that the deed described property that did not correspond to any recorded lot in the city's official survey. Verrill, representing Hector Corbin, pulled the Barton Wade survey from 1847. He pulled Elias Corbin's original deed registration. He found 3 witnesses who had personally been in the district. He argued that the city's failure to map the neighborhood was an administrative failure, not evidence that the neighborhood had not existed. He won. The court ruled that the deed was valid and that the estate passed to Hector Corbin. The ruling was not appealed. The property was assessed for estate tax purposes. The case was closed. The ruling sat in the probate archive. The Wade survey stayed in the Missouri Historical Society. The testimony of the 3 witnesses, their careful descriptions of stone buildings and deep-set windows and streets that descended below the city grade, remained exactly where the court recorder had placed them. The question that nobody asked in 1891 is the one I cannot let go of now. If the lower settlement district existed before St. Louis's official platted city, what was it? The witness testimony places it in use during the 1840s, 1850s, and 1860s. Elias Corbin's deed registration places his family there by 1857. The Wade survey from 1847 places the underground stonework at a minimum of 50 years old, which puts its construction before 1800 at the earliest. But St. Louis, before 1800, was a French Creole trading post with a population under 1,000 people. The settlement that Pierre Laclede and Auguste Chouteau established in 1764 was a modest riverside village. It did not produce vaulted stone passages and multi-story civic buildings. The French colonial records from that period describe exactly what the population numbers suggest, not what Barton Wade found beneath the streets in 1847. Hollander was asked about this during the 1891 hearing. He was asked whether the buildings he had assessed in the lower settlement district in 1863 appeared to be of French colonial construction. He said they did not. He said they were consistent in style with what he called earlier civic work, without being able to specify further. Earlier civic work than French colonial St. Louis, on the west bank of the Mississippi, with vaulted stonework and arched doorways and streets that sat below the grade of everything that grew up around them. Here is what the evidence points toward. I cannot prove it. I am not presenting it as proven. But when you stop trying to make it fit the accepted version and follow it where it actually goes, it leads somewhere specific. There was a built environment along the Mississippi Valley that predated the cities the United States planted there. Permanent stone construction, civic in scale, engineered with a precision that the settler populations did not bring with them. The infrastructure was in place before the surveys began. In some cases, the buildings were still occupied, absorbed into the expanding American cities, as those cities grew up around them. The people living there knew what they were living in. Elias Corbin knew, Cecile Moreau knew, the freight broker Dunbar knew. They did not find it remarkable because it was the neighborhood they had always lived in, and the neighborhood was older than the city around it. As St. Louis grew and the pressure to survey and plat and officially record intensified, the older districts were absorbed, some buried under raised street grades, some demolished for infrastructure. Some left off the maps because the surveyors did not know how to account for them under American municipal land law. The 1891 court case is unusual not because the district existed, it is unusual because someone sued to prove it. In the years after the ruling, Hector Corbin attempted to sell the property. The title was legally valid, confirmed by court ruling. But no surveyor would provide a current assessment because the physical lot could not be located on any existing city map. The deed described a location. The location had no modern corresponding address. The property was never sold in Hector Corbin's lifetime. He died in 1907. The deed passed through his estate after that, and the chain becomes difficult to follow. The original deed registration, Elias Corbin's 1857 document, is still in the St. Louis City Recorder's Archive, filed under an administrative category that translates roughly as unverified location claims. There are, according to the index, 47 such filings in St. Louis City from between 1840 and 1880. 47 deeds for properties on streets that do not appear on any official map. Some are obvious transcription errors, but the Corbin filing was confirmed by a court of law as describing real property that had existed. How many of the other 46 describe something similar? Nobody has worked through all of them the way Verrill worked through the Corbin file. Not in the 1890s, not since. The Wade survey is still at the Missouri Historical Society. The Corbin probate transcript is still in the St. Louis City Archive. The 47 unverified filings are still indexed. Hollander answered the judge's question in 1891 as clearly as anyone has ever answered it. Not whether the buildings were there, he told us they were there. The question is what they were. Who built them? How long they stood before the city growing around them decided one administrative record at a time that they had never existed. Vera Corbin was born in that place in 1853. She lived her life in a city that was slowly, officially, erasing the ground beneath her. She died before the erasure was complete. Her brother's lawsuit caught one thread before it disappeared. 36 years old, born in a buried city, survived by a deed to property on a street that is not on any map. The archives do not forget. And somewhere in those 47 unverified filings, in the Wade survey's measurements of passage dimensions and vault heights, in the sworn testimony of 3 witnesses who describe what they had seen with their own eyes, in the ruling of a court that chose documented reality over official record, the outline of what was there is still visible. If you are willing to look at it directly instead of looking at what you were told to look for,